Far beyond the busy trade routes known to humanity, there was a region of space that very few travelers ever visited. Most captains avoided it because of strange magnetic storms and unstable passages that could damage even the strongest ships. But for one human explorer named Adrian Cole, dangerous places were often the most interesting. He had spent most of his life traveling from one system to another, delivering supplies, studying unusual worlds, and collecting stories that many people back home would never believe. Adrian was not a soldier or a famous hero. He owned an old transport ship that had seen better days. The vessel was reliable most of the time, but after years of constant travel, some systems had begun showing signs of age. Friends had told him many times to retire or at least buy a newer ship, but Adrian always laughed and said that the old vessel still had plenty of adventures left in it. During one journey, he accepted a small delivery mission that required passing through a rarely used sector. According to his charts, the route would save several days. It seemed like an easy decision. The weather reports showed nothing unusual, and everything appeared normal when he entered the region. But space had a way of surprising even experienced travelers. Halfway through the sector, warning alarms suddenly filled the cockpit. A powerful energy disturbance appeared without warning. The sensors became useless. Lights flickered. Several systems shut down at the same time. Adrian tried to stabilize the ship, but the controls stopped responding properly. He had survived difficult situations before, but this was different. Within seconds, one engine failed completely. Then another system exploded behind a maintenance panel. Smoke spread through part of the ship. Emergency power activated, but it was barely enough to keep life support running. Adrian immediately sent out distress calls. No answer came. He tried again. Still nothing. The nearest human station was too far away. His communication array had been damaged during the storm, and every minute the ship drifted farther into unknown territory. For 3 days, Adrian fought to keep himself alive. He repaired what he could and carefully rationed food and water. Sleep became almost impossible. The silence around him was worse than the fear. He knew that if nobody found him soon, his chances would disappear completely. On the 4th day, the ship's power dropped to dangerous levels. Adrian sat quietly inside the dim cockpit and looked at the stars outside. He thought about home. He thought about his family. He thought about all the places he had visited throughout his life. He had always imagined that if his journey ever ended, it would happen during some grand adventure. Instead, he found himself alone, floating through endless darkness. Then something unexpected happened. One of the sensors suddenly came alive. Another vessel had appeared nearby. Adrian almost thought he was imagining things. His damaged communication system struggled to function, but he managed to send another distress signal. Minutes later, strange symbols appeared on the screen. The language was unfamiliar. Someone had received his message. Relief washed over him. He quickly transmitted emergency information and hoped the strangers understood enough to realize how serious the situation was. The unknown ship approached carefully. It was unlike anything Adrian had seen before. Its design was smooth and elegant, with glowing patterns along its surface. It clearly belonged to a species humanity had never officially encountered. For a moment, Adrian wondered if helping him would even cross their minds. After all, he was a complete stranger. But the vessel moved closer. Soon, another signal appeared. Although neither side understood each other's language, one thing was obvious. They wanted to help. Several hours later, the alien crew managed to establish a connection between both ships. Using simple pictures and automatic translators, they slowly began communicating basic information. Adrian learned that the nearby world belonged to a peaceful civilization that preferred staying away from outside conflicts. They rarely interacted with visitors and had almost no experience with humans. Even so, they had chosen to answer his distress call. Repair drones were sent first. When they discovered that Adrian's ship had suffered too much damage, the aliens made another decision. They invited him aboard. Adrian accepted. As he entered their vessel, he expected fear or suspicion. Instead, he found concern. The crew treated him carefully. They brought food and water. Their medical teams examined him to make sure he was healthy. Although communication remained difficult, kindness needed very few words. Within 2 days, they reached their homeworld. The planet was beautiful. Large oceans covered much of the surface, while green forests stretched across huge continents. Their cities blended naturally with the environment. Everything seemed peaceful and calm. Adrian soon discovered that not everyone agreed with bringing an outsider to their world. Some leaders worried about the risks. Others feared that humans might become a problem in the future. There had been many debates before the rescue ship even arrived home. But several respected members of the community defended their decision. They argued that leaving someone alone to die would go against everything their people believed. In the end, compassion had won. Adrian never forgot that. At first, life among the aliens felt strange. Simple tasks became complicated because of language barriers. Foods were different, customs were unfamiliar. Everyday routines often confused him. Still, the people around him remained patient. Little by little, translators improved. Conversations became easier. Adrian began learning about their traditions. He listened to their stories and shared stories from Earth in return. Children became especially curious about the human visitor. They asked endless questions about oceans, mountains, animals, and cities back on Earth. In return, Adrian learned about their music, celebrations, and history. Months passed. His damaged ship remained beyond repair, and building replacement parts would take time. Surprisingly, Adrian stopped worrying about leaving. For the first time in years, he experienced something he had almost forgotten: peace. He helped where he could. He assisted engineers with maintenance projects. He taught younger students about human science and navigation. In return, he learned skills and ideas that fascinated him. People who had originally doubted him slowly changed their minds. The outsider had become a friend. One elderly community leader especially enjoyed spending time with Adrian. The two often sat together and shared stories for hours. Though their cultures were completely different, they discovered many similarities. Both valued family. Both respected honesty. Both believed that kindness mattered more than power. The old leader once admitted that many people had questioned the rescue mission. Adrian smiled. "Back home," he explained, "there are people who would have done exactly what you did." The elderly leader laughed softly. "Then perhaps our peoples are not so different." As the months turned into a year, Adrian became almost like family to many of them. Festivals felt brighter with his presence. Meals became moments filled with jokes and stories. The children who had once been nervous around him now competed to hear his latest adventures. But eventually, his ship could no longer keep him there. With help from the community, replacement systems had finally been completed. Engineers worked carefully to restore enough functions for a safe journey. The day of departure arrived sooner than anyone expected. Adrian found it harder than he imagined. He had arrived as a stranger. Now he was leaving friends behind. Many gathered to say goodbye. Some gave him small gifts to remember them by. Others simply stood quietly, wishing him safe travels. The elderly leader handed Adrian a communication device specially designed for long-distance emergencies. "If fate ever separates friends," the old leader said through the translator, "perhaps this will help them find one another again." Adrian accepted the gift with gratitude. Then he gave them something in return. A promise. "If you ever need help," he said, "call me." Some smiled politely. Others appreciated his words, but doubted they would ever need assistance from distant humans. Years would pass. People changed. Civilizations changed. Promises were easily forgotten. But Adrian looked at each face gathered around him and spoke with complete sincerity. "No matter how much time passes, humanity will remember what you did for one lost traveler." Soon after, his ship disappeared into the stars. Life continued peacefully on the world he had left behind. Seasons passed, children grew older, new generations were born. The memory of the human visitor slowly became a treasured story told during gatherings. Many believed they would never see him again. Then the galaxy around them began changing. Strange vessels started appearing near neighboring systems. Trade routes became unstable. Rumors spread about a powerful empire expanding deeper into unexplored regions. At first, the peaceful world paid little attention. Surely such troubles would remain far away. But year after year, reports grew worse. Entire sectors had fallen under outside control. Smaller civilizations disappeared, and one day, distant scanners detected unfamiliar ships moving closer to their own borders. For the first time in generations, fear entered a world that had known only peace. And somewhere, deep inside a secure archive, an old communication device waited silently, still connected, still working, and still carrying the promise of one grateful human. More than 20 years had passed since Adrian Cole left the peaceful world that had once saved his life. Time had changed many things across the galaxy. New trade routes had opened. Entire colonies had grown into busy cities. Human technology had advanced faster than anyone expected. But one thing had never changed. Adrian never forgot the people who had rescued him when he had been completely alone. Whenever he visited a station or shared stories with younger captains, he always spoke about them. Some listeners thought the story sounded unbelievable. Others simply enjoyed hearing about the distant world where strangers had shown kindness to a dying traveler. Over the years, the story became famous among many human crews. People started calling it the Promise Journey. Nobody knew the real name of the world. Adrian had always respected their privacy and never revealed exact coordinates. But everyone who knew him understood one thing. He owed his life to them, and he never hid his gratitude. By this time, Adrian was no longer the young explorer he once had been. His hair had turned gray, and his travels had become less frequent. Instead of chasing adventures, he spent most of his days managing shipping operations and mentoring younger captains. Yet he still kept one object close to him, the communication device given to him so many years ago. Most days it remained silent. Sometimes he would look at it and smile. He often wondered how his old friends were doing. Had the children grown up? Was the elderly leader still alive? Did they ever think about the strange human who had accidentally become part of their lives? He never expected to find out. One quiet evening, while reviewing cargo schedules, a soft sound suddenly interrupted the room. At first, Adrian froze. He knew that sound. His eyes slowly moved toward the old device sitting on the shelf. For a moment, he thought his mind was playing tricks on him. But the sound came again. The emergency channel was active. His heart began beating faster. With shaking hands, he picked up the device. A weak signal appeared. The translation system struggled, but one thing became immediately clear. Someone was calling, and the call had come from the same world that had saved him decades earlier. Adrian stared silently at the message. The signal was damaged and incomplete, but fear could be heard even through broken translations. Their world was in trouble. Unknown forces had appeared. Pressure was increasing. Their leaders had exhausted every peaceful option available. And now, with nowhere else to turn, they had remembered the promise made by one grateful human. For several seconds, Adrian simply sat in silence. Memories flooded his mind. The rescue ship, the laughter during festivals, the children asking endless questions, the old leader sharing stories late into the night. They had once saved a stranger without asking for anything in return. And now they needed help. Adrian stood up immediately. Despite his age, he moved with a speed that surprised everyone around him. He canceled every meeting. He ignored every message. Instead, he opened communication channels that he had not used in years. One by one, he contacted old friends, retired captains, cargo operators, explorers, mining crews, transport companies, people who had heard his story countless times. Many answered with smiles, until they saw his face. Nobody had seen Adrian look like that before. Without wasting time, he delivered a simple message. They called. That was all he needed to say. Most people immediately understood. Within minutes, news spread faster than anyone imagined. Across human space, old conversations suddenly became real. The people from the famous story were asking for help. At first, only a few ships responded, then dozens, then hundreds. Captains changed their routes. Supply vessels postponed deliveries. Exploration crews canceled missions. Messages flooded communication networks. Many younger captains who had grown up listening to Adrian's story wanted to participate. Some had never met him personally, but they knew the legend. The strangers who had once shown kindness to a lost human had finally asked for help, and humanity intended to answer. Meanwhile, on the peaceful world itself, the situation continued to worsen. The expanding empire had grown increasingly confident. Its leaders believed the isolated civilization would eventually surrender. After all, the world had no military power, no powerful allies, no history of conflict. From the empire's point of view, resistance was impossible. Their commanders expected negotiations to end soon. What they did not know was that a message had already crossed the stars, and humans had received it. Back on Earth and across nearby colonies, something unusual was happening. People from every profession began contributing. Doctors volunteered medical supplies. Engineers offered repair equipment. Farmers donated food shipments. Manufacturing companies provided emergency generators. Former naval crews prepared older escort ships that had long been retired. Nobody ordered them to do it. Nobody forced them. They simply chose to help. News networks quickly picked up the story. Reporters interviewed Adrian. Millions watched as the elderly captain sat quietly before cameras. One reporter asked him why he looked so emotional. Adrian smiled softly. "Because I shouldn't be here," he answered. "The only reason I lived long enough to grow old is because strangers chose kindness over fear." The interview spread everywhere, and with every passing hour, more ships joined. The governments of several human worlds were surprised by the growing movement. At first, officials worried that uncontrolled actions might create larger problems. But public support became impossible to ignore. People everywhere shared the same opinion. Nobody was talking about conquest. Nobody wanted war. They simply wanted to stand beside friends. Even political leaders who had never met Adrian understood the meaning behind the response. Kindness deserved loyalty. Soon, official humanitarian convoys were approved. Medical teams volunteered. Diplomatic representatives prepared peaceful missions. Communications specialists translated every message they could recover from the old signal. Still, nobody knew exactly what they would find upon arrival. Only one thing was certain: they would not allow the peaceful world to face its troubles alone. As preparations continued, Adrian received an unexpected visitor. A young captain named Elias arrived at his office. He had grown up listening to Adrian's stories and had become one of the most respected cargo pilots in human space. "Sir," he said, "my crew is ready." Adrian smiled. Good. But Elias wasn't finished. Not just my crew. He handed over a list. Adrian looked down. Hundreds of names, then thousands, then tens of thousands. Captains, operators, volunteers, pilots. Retired officers, families, entire communities. Many had written short messages beside their names. For the promise. For the ones who saved him. No friend stands alone. Adrian stared quietly. His eyes became wet. Not because he was sad, but because he realized something incredible. His promise had never belonged only to him. Over the years, it had become humanity's promise. Far away, the Empire's fleets continued their operations with complete confidence. Reports showed no unusual military activity. Their commanders believed the sector remained isolated. They had no idea that thousands of vessels were already moving toward them. The galaxy itself began noticing strange traffic patterns. Observers were confused. Cargo ships from dozens of systems had altered their routes. Mining vessels were traveling together. Passenger carriers were moving in unusual formations. Old exploration ships had suddenly left retirement. People started asking questions. Where were they all going? Why were so many Terran captains heading toward the same distant sector? The answer soon became known, and even civilizations outside human space found themselves amazed. One small act of kindness, one rescued traveler, one promise made decades earlier, and now thousands were answering the call. Back on the peaceful world, hope had almost disappeared. The elderly leader who had once spoken with Adrian all those years ago had become very old. Many believed the message had failed. Perhaps the human had forgotten. Perhaps time had erased old friendships. Perhaps nobody had heard. Then one morning, reports began arriving from deep space observation stations. At first, nobody believed them. The sensors had to be checked 3 times, then 4 times, because the numbers seemed impossible. Unknown vessels were appearing at the edge of the system. Not one, not 10, hundreds. Then more and more. Every few minutes, additional ships emerged from hyperspace. Large ships, small ships, cargo vessels, transport carriers, exploration craft, medical ships, mining platforms, escort vessels. The entire sky seemed to be filling with visitors. Fear spread briefly among the population. Nobody knew who these newcomers were. Then the communication centers received a transmission. The translators worked quickly, and a single sentence appeared across every screen. A sentence spoken by a familiar voice, an older voice, but one they remembered. Adrian Cole had answered, and he had not come alone. The elderly leader looked toward the stars with tears in his eyes, because what appeared above their world was far beyond anything they had imagined. The human had kept his promise, and somehow, every Terran captain had heard the call. For several long minutes, nobody on the peaceful world could fully understand what they were seeing. The sensors continued reporting new arrivals every few moments. Ship after ship emerged from hyperspace. Huge cargo carriers, medical vessels, exploration craft, mining ships, civilian transports, old escort ships that looked as though they had served for generations. Some vessels were new and modern. Others carried signs of age and countless journeys. But they all shared one thing. They had come from human space. Inside the observation centers, officials checked the numbers repeatedly. The results never changed. Thousands of ships were gathering around their world. People filled the streets, staring toward the sky in disbelief. Nobody had expected this. Not even the elderly leader who had sent the message. When he had activated the communication device, he had hoped that perhaps one human might answer. Maybe Adrian himself. Maybe a single ship. Maybe a message. Never this. Never something so overwhelming. Meanwhile, the commanders of the expanding empire were equally confused. Their sensors suddenly detected a level of traffic they had not predicted. Reports arrived from one officer after another. The number of incoming vessels kept increasing. Nobody understood why. The peaceful civilization they intended to pressure had no military alliances, no defense agreements, no nearby friends. Yet somehow thousands of Terran vessels were appearing from every direction. The Empire immediately slowed its operations and began gathering information. Who were these humans? Why had they arrived? And why were so many civilian ships traveling together? Back among the growing Terran fleet, there was no panic, no shouting, no chaos. Everything moved with surprising order. Medical ships formed support lines, supply vessels organized resources, communication stations established secure channels. Experienced captains guided younger crews. Nobody had come looking for trouble. They had come because a promise mattered. Adrian Cole stood quietly inside the bridge of his ship and watched the stars. Beside him stood Elias and several younger officers. None of them spoke. They simply stared at the endless collection of ships surrounding them. One officer shook his head. I've never seen anything like this. Neither had Adrian. He had expected support. But not this, not thousands. Not entire communities answering a promise that had started with one lonely traveler decades earlier. Then another message arrived. It came from the surface. The elderly leader wanted to speak. Adrian smiled. Prepare the shuttle. The news spread quickly throughout the fleet. Adrian was going down to the world that had saved him. Many crews watched the transmission with excitement. For years, they had heard stories. Now they were finally witnessing the people behind those stories. When Adrian stepped onto the landing platform, he paused. Memories flooded back immediately. The forests, the clean air, the peaceful sounds. Even after all those years, the world felt familiar. Waiting for him was the elderly leader. Age had changed them both. Their hair had turned white. Their movements had slowed. But neither failed to recognize the other. For several seconds, they simply stood there. Then both smiled. No speeches were necessary. No translators were needed. Friends who had once said goodbye had finally met again. The old leader's eyes became wet. "You remembered?" Adrian laughed softly. "Of course I remembered." Then he looked toward the sky. "No." He smiled again. "We remembered." The elderly leader followed his gaze. Thousands of lights filled the heavens. And for the first time in many months, hope returned. Across the galaxy, news channels exploded with reports. People everywhere watched the growing fleet. Experts struggled to explain what was happening. Historians called it unprecedented. Commentators called it impossible. But ordinary people understood. Kindness had been remembered. Human governments soon sent official representatives. Diplomats arrived. Scientists arrived. Humanitarian teams arrived. Their message remained simple. They had not come to conquer. They had not come to threaten. They had come to support friends. The Empire's leaders found themselves facing something unexpected. Humanity had not responded with anger. There were no demands, no aggressive declarations, only unity. And somehow that was more surprising, because every report reaching them showed the same thing. These ships had not been forced to come. Most belonged to civilians, ordinary people, merchants, pilots, miners, transport workers, explorers, families. They had volunteered. That fact disturbed many imperial officials, because it revealed something difficult to understand. Human loyalty could not easily be measured, and gratitude could not easily be predicted. As tensions rose, several diplomatic meetings were arranged. Representatives from both sides gathered. Human delegates made one thing clear: peace remained the priority. Nobody wanted conflict. But the world that had answered a distress signal many years earlier would not face pressure alone. The Empire's leaders carefully studied the situation. The numbers spoke for themselves. Even if they ignored official governments, thousands of independent Terran ships filled the system. And every hour, more continued arriving. Starting a larger crisis would help nobody. Eventually, after days of discussions, the Empire made a decision. Their expansion efforts in the region would stop. Their fleets slowly withdrew, and one by one, their vessels disappeared into deep space. When the news became official, celebrations erupted across the peaceful world. People filled public squares. Children laughed and danced. Families embraced. For months, fear had controlled their lives. Now relief had replaced it. Human crews celebrated too, not because anyone had lost, but because nobody had. Peace had won, and that was enough. In the days that followed, friendships formed everywhere. Medical teams helped improve hospitals. Engineers repaired aging systems. Scientists exchanged knowledge. Students from both civilizations began learning about one another. The younger generation became especially curious. Many children had grown up hearing stories about the strange human named Adrian. Now they met thousands of humans, and they discovered something funny. Humans were just as curious about them. Questions never seemed to end. People laughed together, shared meals together, told stories together. And slowly, what had once been a memory became a lasting friendship. Adrian spent much of his time with the elderly leader. They often sat beneath the same trees where they had once shared stories decades earlier. One evening, as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, the old leader smiled. "When we rescued you, some believed we had made a mistake." Adrian chuckled. "And some humans thought my stories were exaggerated." They both laughed. Then silence settled around them. A peaceful silence. The elderly leader looked toward the stars. "I only expected one ship." Adrian smiled. "So did I." Neither of them truly understood how the story had spread so far. But perhaps that was the beauty of it. Kindness had traveled farther than either of them imagined. Months later, trade routes officially opened between both civilizations. New partnerships formed. Tourism increased. Research projects began. Artists exchanged ideas. Musicians shared songs. Friendships grew stronger with every passing year. And everywhere Adrian traveled, people wanted to hear the story again. But he always corrected them when they called him a hero. "It wasn't about me," he would say. "It started because strangers decided to help someone they had never met." As the years passed, Adrian eventually retired completely. His adventures became memories. His ship remained docked. His hair turned even whiter. But one thing never changed. Visitors continued arriving. Young captains, students, families, travelers. Many simply wanted to hear the story from the man who had lived it. And every time, Adrian told it exactly the same way. Not as a story about fleets. Not as a story about politics. Not even as a story about humanity. He told it as a story about kindness. Because everything that followed had started with a simple decision. Someone had chosen compassion over fear. Years later, historians across the galaxy would write books about the event. Some called it the Great Gathering. Others called it the Promise Fleet. But ordinary people preferred another name. They simply called it the Answer. Because when the call finally went out, every Terran captain answered. And long after the ships had returned home and generations had passed, children from both civilizations still learned the same lesson. A single act of kindness may seem small, but sometimes kindness echoes across decades. Sometimes it reaches farther than stars. And sometimes the life you save today becomes the friend who stands beside you tomorrow. That was the lesson Adrian carried until the end of his days. And it became the promise shared by two worlds. No matter how much time passed, no matter how far the distance, neither side would ever stand alone again.